This is a ridiculously huge print. Just how I like it. In this video, I'll talk about how I prepared this file for print, as well as the adventure of acquiring this scene on film. Zion National Park, one of my favorite parks of Utah's Big Five. The mix of greenery with the red sandstone and water makes for a truly stunning landscape that attracted 4.6 million visitors in 2023. That's like having the entire population of the state of Louisiana visit the park. Needless to say, Zion is crowded, and finding a space where you can appreciate nature without all the chatter and commotion means heading into the backcountry. I'm talking about areas of the park that require you to be in good physical shape and accepting of the fact that if you injure yourself, you may not make it out alive. I wish I was exaggerating, but you do have to properly prepare yourself before you head out into the wilderness. You don't want to be caught with your pants down because you could end up with frostbite. As many of you already know, this particular location is known as the Subway. It is an amazing geological feature along the left fork of North Creek. There are several other astonishingly beautiful features like Archangel Falls and the Crack that are located within the last 100 yards or so of this 9-mile round-trip hike. Did I mention that there is no marked trail and it requires you to descend 450 feet into a canyon with very steep grades? I would speculate that in some areas the grade is around 30%. All the while, the danger of tumbling off the sheer cliffs looms with every footstep. Think about this. At the beginning of the hike, your body is energized and ready to be active. On the return, you have to climb that same steep cliffside with all of those same drop-offs when you are all ready to call it a day and have your gin and tonic. If you're a large format photographer, don't forget, there's also all that ridiculously huge gear that you need to carry in order to get the shot you're after. If you're curious, research suggests that carrying 20 to 35% of your body weight in the form of a backpack or other load increases energy expenditure and the bulk movement of air in and out of the lung, or more precisely, minute ventilation, by about 10%. In addition, movement economy decreases because the loads change the biomechanics, or simply put, the way we move. The takeaway message is that you'll need more snacks, more water, and solid physical conditioning to offset that backpack with your large format gear. As an 8x10 shooter, I've tried to keep my pack to under 30 pounds as much as possible. But remember, that doesn't include food and water. For me, that adds another 6 to 10 pounds depending upon how much I think I should pack. If you want to see how I managed to keep my large format gear under 30 pounds, I'll leave a link to that video in the description. I think it goes without saying that hiking to this location with large format gear is already a feat in and of itself. Then there's adding the complication of capturing a scene with all of the elements coming together to form a compelling image. From a purely photographical viewpoint, this is the main reason I like to revisit locations over and over again, because having all of the elements look subjectively just right is mostly happenstance in my humble opinion. It took me 4 visits to the Subway before I realized that the conditions during my last visit in the fall of 2022 were prime for photographing this indelible scene. For example, take a look at this version of the scene from the first time I visited the Subway in 2018. Aside from a composition that I'm not crazy about, the reflected light on the walls was weaker because of the partly cloudy conditions. While it's still nice, it's not as intense as the version I decided to print. In addition, look at the pool of water. The prevalence of all that sand diminishes the appearance of the wonderful emerald green color of the water. I think the sand would be okay if there were visible ripples, but in this image, they just look like blobs to me. You may be asking, then why did you waste the film, Tony? Well, it was my first time visiting, so I didn't know any better, and I didn't know if I'd ever go back, so I exposed some film. In the second photo from my June of 2021 trip, 2 large logs were now part of the scene, and I thought that would make for an interesting photo. However, even though it was 11 a.m., the light was now harsh and the scene was very high contrast. I contemplated for a few minutes of whether or not I should even bother wasting the film. I rationalized the use of a piece of film to test just how good Acrylic could function on a scene like this. So it was more of an experiment. As you can see, this was an experiment that demonstrated that this was not the time to photograph this scene. By the way, did you notice how clear those pools look? In the fall, the logs were gone, but the pools now were filled with enough sand that you could walk out into the middle of the pools and only be in about 6 inches of water. Not only that, the reflected light is non-existent because of the cloud cover. Needless to say, I didn't even attempt to shoot this scene on my third visit because it was apparent that I would never, ever make a print of this scene in this condition. Are you starting to understand why I revisit locations over and over again? Or maybe you're thinking, man, Tony is one picky son of a Quite frankly, I wasn't completely sold on capturing the subway in hopes of making a ridiculously huge print for my family's home. I was really after Archangel Falls and the Crack because those were the most interesting to me, especially the falls. Ironically, I haven't been able to capture Archangel Falls under subjectively ideal conditions, but I now have the Crack and the subway printed ridiculously huge and displayed in our home. But I digress. It was on my fourth visit in the fall of 2022 that I realized that the conditions at the subway had the potential to turn out amazingly well on film. That's information you can't look up on the internet. You have to physically be there, or I suppose have someone tell you that there's something special going on at that particular time. Needless to say, I had no hesitation to set up my large format camera and burn some film. From a compositional standpoint, I knew from shooting this scene previously that I had to take the classic viewpoint, otherwise I wasn't going to be happy with my shot. I know, it's a cliche of a scene, but it's a darn good one. Why mess with a formula that just works? I'm perfectly happy with that because if you've ever been to the subway, you know that there isn't a lot of room to move a ridiculously huge camera around. So you have to work with those limitations, and sometimes that means images take on a common composition. Again, if it works, it's still yours regardless and won't be 100% like everyone else's because of the varying conditions. Just do an internet search for subway images and you'll see exactly what I mean. Besides, I shoot large format and print ridiculously huge as a challenge to enable personal growth and for my family's enjoyment of my images. Within my composition, you'll notice that I chose to show a good bit of the opening at the top of the tunnel portion of the subway. This was intentional because I wanted to leave room for future cropping, but I also really loved the way the soft light was illuminating the rock face as well as the dangling plant material. I also made sure that there was a balance between the size of the pool of water on the right with the sandstone on the left. I viewed them as two pseudo-triangles that point in the direction of the tunnel portion of the subway. Basically, leading your eyes in that direction of that feature. One of the details of this scene that I love is that lone boulder on the upper middle right of the scene. I thought it would be important to make sure that there was enough space around the entire boulder so that you could see the sand ripples, as if this was some kind of Caribbean island. Fortunately, with the camera being at eye level, this wasn't difficult to achieve. The last detail that I was hoping to include was the swirling pool of fall leaves in the lower right-hand corner. I think that's an important feature of this image because it brings to the viewer's attention the dynamic nature of this body of water, and it also serves as an indicator of the ever-present powerful natural forces behind the creation of this amazing geological feature. Okay, are you ready for the technical details of this image? Here goes. This is an 8x10 piece of Kodak Acrylic film that I exposed for 6 minutes and 30 seconds. That includes taking into account reciprocity failure. I used my Nikon Nikkor 150mm SW lens with my Haida square polarizing filter to reduce reflections on the surface of the water. That enables you to see to the bottom of the pool and also brings out the emerald green color. As an important side note, I used the special filter holder that slides onto the barrel of the lens to eliminate vignette. If you use the standard holder with this lens, there's a good chance you'll get vignette. That's a lesson I learned the hard way. I determined the optimal aperture to be f/45 for the scene. If you haven't seen my lens review video of this spectacular glass, I'll leave a link to it in the description. In case you were wondering, I only took one exposure of this scene and saved my last sheet of film for shooting the reverse angle of this scene. As you can see, it's just not as impressive as the classic viewpoint, at least not for me. About a month after crawling out of that canyon, I developed my film using my Jobo processor. If you want to see how to do that, I'll leave a link to that video in the description as well. Then, I wet mounted my film onto an acrylic drum and scanned the image on my Haltech 6500. In Silverfast 6.6, I chose to scan the film as a color transparency at 2500 ppi, 46-bit color TIFF image in an Adobe RGB color space with no sharpening applied. That yielded a 2.76 gigabyte file consisting of about 494 megapixels. At a standard printing resolution of 300 ppi, that resulted in an image size output of 66 inches high by 83 inches wide. That's what I call ridiculously huge. The takeaway message here is that my scanning resolution was more than robust to meet the demands of my needed output, even if you decide to view the print with your nose within inches of the acrylic. I think it's important to talk about the fact that I already had the frame and liner, so all I needed to do was make sure that my print was sized to fit a 48 inches high by 72 inches wide opening. It's also important to note that the ratios between my frame and liner setup and the film are different. The frame and liner are in a 4:6 ratio, while the film is a 4:5 ratio. Needless to say, I was forced to crop the image. Thankfully, I think the 4:6 ratio complements this scene nicely. So what did I do to prepare this image file for print? I first started by converting the image from a color negative to a positive using a technique I've talked about before on this channel. You can see how I converted this very image of the subway by watching my video. I'll leave a link to that video in the description too. Just to be clear, pun intended, I spent several hours over the course of several days reviewing the image and cleaning up the little dust mongers at zoom levels between 60 to 200%. With a print this large, I didn't want to take any chances of missing anything that wasn't supposed to be a part of this scene. Once I was happy with the cleanup, I then created a new file in Photoshop that is 48.5 inches high by 72.5 inches wide at a resolution of 300 ppi. Why the extra ½ inch all the way around the image? That's to accommodate the trimming of the final piece once it's sandwiched between the acrylic layers. This additional space is called the bleed. I used the RGB color mode at 16 bits and set the color profile to Adobe RGB 1998. I left the background white and the pixel aspect ratio set to square. These settings created a file with a resolution of 316 megapixels for a file size of 905 megabytes without any image data. I think it's worth mentioning that as an alternative to Photoshop, some photographers like to use software such as On1 Resize or Blow Up to resize their images. When I work for National Geographic Fine Art Galleries, I used both of those to resize images for print because that's what we had available. But personally, I haven't noticed any significant differences in my prints using Photoshop to output my print size because I'm already starting with a massive amount of resolution. The next step was to place my previously prepared image file with all of my file edits within this file. This is where I got to decide exactly how I wanted to crop the image. Once I was happy with my crop, I simply merged the layers and flattened the image to reduce the file size down to a meager file size of 1.77 gigabytes. Then I sent the file over to MaxArt Productions for imaging on their LightJet 430 using my favorite print material, Fujifilm's Fujiflex Crystal Archive. It's a printing medium that is exposed optically to light and is developed using the RA4 process. It's a beautiful, warm-toned and vibrant medium that gives vivid colors. If you haven't witnessed these prints in person, they are truly magnificent. Unfortunately, just like Velvia 50 and Provia film stocks, Fujifilm is making it more difficult to source this printing medium. Nick over at MaxArt Productions indicated to me that he is more than likely going to be switching to a dye sublimation process because of the sourcing problems. That certainly was a motivating factor for me in getting this print made. So if you love the look of Fujifilm's Fujiflex Crystal Archive, I would strongly suggest making some prints while you still can. I think it's also worth mentioning that it's important to work closely with your printer to ensure that your image prints exactly like you expect. That collaborative process begins with making sure your monitor is calibrated and that you are using the correct color mode, space, and printer color profile if needed by your printer. Once MaxArt printed my image, I inspected it and signed it prior to the artisans mounting it to the acrylic. If you are interested in seeing the specifics of how this process is completed, yes, I have a video for that as well that I'll leave in the description. Once I picked up the completed print, I proceeded to mount it into the frame by affixing double-sided heavy-duty tape to the backside of the print. If you want to financially help me pay for my expensive 8x10 film, please purchase your 3M VHB tape using the Amazon link I've provided in the description. Thank you in advance if you choose to do so. I finished the job by securing 3 custom-cut half-inch plywood pieces to the frame and attached the gallery rail. As you would expect, I also secured the other half of the gallery rail to the wall, making sure that the 3-inch screws were driven into the studs. Once the gallery rail was secured, I convinced my friend Rich to risk a herniated disc to mount this piece to the wall. Fortunately, we survived the lift. Many thanks to Rich for helping me out. If you're curious about the placement of the art on the wall, I use the rule of thumb that the horizontal center of the print should be placed at eye level for the best viewing experience. Obviously, this is going to be different for everyone, so my precise measurements of where I placed my gallery rails along the wall and on the backside of the frame aren't going to mean anything to you. As long as the frame is secure and it's at an appropriate viewing height for you, then there's nothing else to worry about. The only thing I would recommend is not hanging your artwork in a location that has direct sunlight hitting the piece. That could lead to premature fading of the image. Dare I even mention the topic of how to light your artwork properly? If that's a topic you'd like me to explore in a future video, please let me know in the comments. Arguably, there is certainly nothing more satisfying in the photographic process than to make a tangible print, in this guy's humble opinion. If you are a photographer, I would strongly encourage you to make prints of your work. They don't have to be ridiculously huge like I like my prints. They can be gratifying and provide you with a sense of accomplishment at any size. The best part is that you can decorate your home with artwork created by you. Now that's something to be proud of. If you've enjoyed this video, please give it a like and consider subscribing if you haven't already done so. Let's make this channel ridiculously huge so that I can continue to provide content that you enjoy watching. As always, thanks for watching. Tony is one picky son of a bull.